Well, today I want to start by saying a big happy Mother's Day to all you moms in the room and all you moms who are watching and listening online. Because moms, you are amazing. As you just saw the video, if you were here a little bit earlier, not only did you give birth to us, which, by the way, thank you, but moms, you are so critical and important in the life and the development of your sons and daughters. I mean, you are distinctly gifted to develop the emotional life of your children, which is such an important role. And so when I say Happy Mother's Day, like I legitimately mean it. And I hope today that it can just feel like just a fun day, that you can walk around your house today and just you can say the words, hey, it's just my day. It's my day, you know? And you can put your PJs on and you can take a bath and you don't feel guilty at all and you just feel totally free. I genuinely hope that you can experience that as a mom today. And here's the deal. I think I've also got to just acknowledge a little bit that I know today, Mother's Day, can be kind of a mixed day for some of us. My mom passed away in 2012. And so today is one of those kind of, it feels like this weird tension because on one hand, it's so celebratory. And you want to celebrate your wife. You want to celebrate the moms around. But on the other hand, you feel this emotion. And so my hope for you today, if you kind of feel that, is I hope that you really feel the encouragement from the Lord. Like I've been praying for you, and I've been praying for this moment and this day, and I've just been asking God, would you just encourage the hearts? Because I know this day can kind of feel that tension as well. And if you think about this, which it's just interesting, all the emotion that we feel and all this kind of celebratory stuff inside of us, like we get really excited. I mean, Mother's Day just really illuminates the fact of how important moms really are. And moms, you're important for so many different reasons, and we could talk for the next, hour, for the next several days in terms of your importance. But I think one of the things that you bring as a mom is moms bring these statements of wisdom. Moms can say things that are like on Hallmark Hallmark card statements that just stick with you, that you're like, man, that was so good. I'm going to think about that the rest of my life. In fact, what's pretty cool is I'll talk to guys who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and when we talk about their life, I mean, one of the things they'll say is, hey, I've always done this in life because my mama said. I mean, moms, you say things of incredible, incredible wisdom. And as you think about that, there's a statement that I recently read that I thought to myself, I'm like, oh, mom would definitely say that. That feels like a mama statement. And here's what I think moms would say. It's this statement. Sweetie, the quality of your life is only as good as the quality of your relationships. I think every mom would lean in and say, hey, sweetie, I want you to have happiness and contentment and satisfaction and joy in life. And you need to know as your mom, you need to know that the quality of your life is going to be so connected to the quality of your relationships. So, sweetie, do everything you possibly can to increase the quality of your relationships. That's a mama statement. And as I thought about that, I thought, man, I'm so excited about today. Because today we're going to kick off a brand new series that's going to address that statement. In fact, today we're kicking off this series called You've Got a Friend in Me, where we're going to talk about 5 very distinctive keys to begin to unlock the quality of our relationships. We're going to talk about these 5 kind of guides, if you will, or these 5 principles that are going to help us unlock just the depth and intimacy in our relationships. And guys, what's so cool is this series where we're going over the next several weeks, this is going to be for all of us. I mean, if you're a follower of Jesus or not, this is going to be so practical and helpful for all of us. And this is for every relationship. This will work for you if you're in a marriage relationship. This will work for you in a parenting relationship. This will work for you in your extended family relationship, friendships, neighbor relationships, co-work, relationships, school relationships. Every relationship we're going to talk about these 5 keys that will unlock the quality of relationship. And if we're willing to be brave, if we're willing to be courageous over these next several weeks and apply these to our lives, guys, it will unlock not only the quality of our relationship, but it will begin to add to the quality of our lives. So as we think about that, and to begin this whole discussion, I want to share with you a term that I recently heard, and it's the first time I've ever heard this term. And I'm curious if you guys have seen this. Do you guys recognize this word? Have you guys ever heard of this word called frientimacy? Anyone ever heard of this? Anyone? I don't see anyone. This is kind of cool. Like in today's culture, you can make up any kind of word you want, put any kind of definition to it, and just go with it, right? You can be like, yeah, it's just a word. That's my definition. People are like, okay, I guess it's a word. So I recently heard this word, a few weeks ago, and I was like, this is unusual. I don't even think it's a word. And what I discovered is that this word was actually made up by this person named Shasta Nelson. And she wrote a book called Frientimacy. It's a best-selling book. And guys, I love her name, Shasta. Isn't that a cool name? It's just kind of fun to say, like, Shasta, hey, I'm Shasta. That'd be kind of fun to say. And the other reason I really love her name is it reminds me of my alma mater, University of Houston. Go Cougars. Anyone? Just me, myself, and I. I'll just hang out here. All right, well, just so you know, the University of Houston mascot is a cougar named Shasta. And so, yeah, anyways. All right, I've digressed. Let's get back on. So Shasta Nelson, she's amazing. She is a relational expert. She's a friendship expert. And she wrote this book, and there's so many amazing insights in terms of, how to develop our friendships, what it looks like, and she defines this word frientimacy, which she invented. And she says frientimacy is where two people both feel seen in a safe and satisfying way. In other words, frientimacy is that consistency in that relationship. Frientimacy is the intimacy in the relationship. Frientimacy is where there's vulnerability. Frientimacy is where there's that positivity. Frientimacy is that idea to go, man, there is such depth and substance and quality to this relationship. And I'm seen, and I'm heard, and I'm safe. And she said, that's what we desire. I mean, that's by definition a quality relationship. But there's a difficulty. There's kind of a chasm to actually get there. And the tension to actually get there, she talks about. And she says, here's our tension is today, we know more people than any time in history. And yet we feel very much like we have nobody to confide in. Our social networks just keep growing and growing and growing. And yet, so too do our doubts about whether we actually have a safety net and who would be in it should we need it. Modern day loneliness is not because we need to interact more. It's because we need more intimacy. We don't need more connections. We don't need more social media likes, and all of a sudden now I've got, 500 and then 1,000, and oh man, I'm more connected than ever. She's like, you are more connected than you've ever been in human history. But we're experiencing some loneliness. In fact, when I read this, I thought, man, I'm in. I have felt this in my life. I think today what's amazing is I think I'm more connected than I've ever been in the history of my life today. I have more relationships and more connections and more friends than I've ever had. I mean, I can stand up here on the stage and connect with hundreds of people here in the room and online. Jill and I can go, out to a restaurant, or we can go out shopping, and people will come up and connect and share their stories, and their stories are so amazing, and I love it, and I'm like, man, this is so cool. So many connections. But the reality is, I can have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of connections. But there are seasons and times where it feels like I'm completely alone as I struggle in my marriage. There are seasons and times that it feels like I'm completely alone when I struggle as a father. And there are seasons and times where I feel like no one knows, and I'm completely alone in my struggle as a man. And I'm more connected than I've ever been in the history of my life. Yet I feel that loneliness. And guys, I think I'm not alone. I think if we were brutally honest and I could pull your hearts back and I could look into your hearts and look into your minds and we could all kind of do that, I think we would all kind of nod our heads and go, yeah, man, I have felt that too. In fact, Shasta goes on in her book and she talks about this loneliness that, man, it is real. In fact, she does some research, and she researches over 6,000 individuals. And she asked them this question. She said this: how satisfied are you right now on a scale 1 to 10 with the closeness of your friendships? 1 would be not at all, and 10 would be, man, I feel so satisfied. And where do you think the information landed? Where do you think the research landed? Well, we know. And here's the conclusion. She said, approximately 70% of us score 5 or below. And when she summarizes all this research in terms of our relationships, the state of our relationships today, this is current information, here's what she says. She goes on and she says, we are not just leaning toward dissatisfaction with the closest of our relationships. We are 2 to 4 times more likely to put a 1 or 2 than we are to say we are fulfilled with a 9 or 10. If the data and the research is correct, there is a loneliness in this room. There's a loneliness online as you watch and engage. that we are all experiencing in the midst of feeling more connected or knowing more objectively we're more connected than ever before in human history. And here's the deal. When it comes to loneliness, loneliness is a big, big deal. In fact, there's so much research on this, I would encourage you to do it yourself, but here's just one little snippet from Dr. Ornish. Dr. Ornish is an author, a physician, and here's what he says about loneliness. He says, I'm not aware of any other factor in medicine than intimacy and love, not diet, not smoking, not exercise, not stress, not genetics, not drugs, not surgery, that has a greater impact on our quality of life, incidences of illness, and premature death from all causes. Nothing impacts you and I more than our relationships and our loneliness. And if the research is right, this conversation we're about to have is perhaps the most relevant conversation we could have for the benefit of your life. And we've got to ask and answer the question, how do we begin to experience intimacy? I mean, what can we do personally? We can't control the others on the other side of us, but we can certainly do some things in our life to begin to take some steps and discover that vulnerability, take some steps and discover that consistency, take some steps and begin to discover intimacy in our lives, that intimacy in our relationships. And if we're willing to do this together, guys, I'm just telling you, it can lead to a place of quality relationships. It can begin to unlock the quality of relationships so we can unlock the quality of our lives. And if we're willing to be brave and courageous together, we can fulfill what Mama said. I mean, Mama's words of wisdom say this, sweetie, the quality of your life is only as good as the quality of your relationships. And this is what I want for all of us. So guys, today we're going to kick off this whole series. And today we're going to discover our first relational key. And I am so excited to do that with you because this first relational key is something I've thought about for years and years and years. And I think it's so practical and helpful. And again, if you are a follower of Jesus or not, this will work for you. This will make your your relationships better. So our first relational key, what I want to do is I want to go back 2,000 years ago. And I want to go to a gentleman to learn this relational key who actually had two first names, which is kind of cool. And his two first names were Paul and Saul. He had a Hebrew first name and a Roman first name. Saul was his Hebrew first name. Paul was his Roman first name. It'd be pretty cool to have two first names. This guy did. And this guy, Paul Saul, he was a follower of Jesus Christ. And he has an incredible story. And something about Paul is that he went around, he was an evangelist, he was a follower of Jesus, and he would go around all to these different cities, and he would share this incredible news with people. He would say, hey, there's this man named Jesus I need to tell you about. And he said, through Jesus, you can actually have peace with God. And people were like, what? Isn't it the temple? Or isn't it like traditions? Or don't I have to do these 5 things? Or isn't it all the things that I have to do to have peace with God, the sacrificial system? Isn't it that? And Paul said, no, there's something brand new on the scene. His name is Jesus Christ. And he has come to give you peace with God when you place your faith and trust in him. It's that simple. People were like, wow, that is simple. Man, that's good news. He's like, that's not it. I mean, he came to give you purpose and meaning in life, that you could wake up every single day of your life with purpose and meaning. That's what Jesus came to give you. And not only that, but Jesus came to give you an identity. I mean, you don't have to look for your identity and your accomplishments, somehow think I'm a man or I'm a woman or I'm somebody because of look at what I've done. You don't need to look for your identity and what others say about you. Are you kidding me? Man, you'll never know where you stand in your identity. With that, your identity would be totally confusing. He says, man, your identity has been gifted to you through Jesus Christ. And you are a man, and you are a woman, and you have incredible value and worth and significance in the eyes of your heavenly Father through the person of Jesus Christ. And your identity is now a gift. Are you going to receive it? Are you going to receive it? And people were like, man, that's good news. That's incredible news. And Paul was like, yeah, that's why it's called the gospel. It means good news. And one of the places he went was a town called Corinth. And in Corinth, it was an amazing place in the first century. It was like the beautiful, the rich, the famous, the talented lived in Corinth. And he shared this incredible news about purpose and meaning, about identity, about peace with God, about forgiveness, the whole thing. And all these people in Corinth were becoming followers of Jesus. But they had a problem, and the problem is they had relational gaps. The problem is the relationship quality wasn't very good. So Paul leaned in and he wrote a letter called Corinthians, and part of the purpose of the letter of Corinthians, this may be new information for you, is to release and unlock the quality of relationships, to give you insight into how to take some steps and be intentional with your relationships. And Paul gives us some incredible insight in 1 Corinthians 13. And here's what he says. He says, you want to increase your quality of relationships? You want to begin to unlock some things? And everybody's like, yeah. And he's like, okay, here it is. He says, love. Love. In fact, the Beatles were right in 1967 when they wrote the song, All You Need Is Love. Are we all together?
All you need is love.
Woo! There we go. We could only play 3 seconds, or I think Facebook's going to cut us off, or YouTube. So anyways, there we go. So, the Beatles were right. Like in 1967, they said all you need is love. And guys, objectively, if you really think about it, objectively, they're right. All you need is love. But then we ask the question, as we should, because we're human beings, we go, what does that even mean? Can you deconstruct that a little bit? Can you help me get practical? What does love look like in our relationships? And I love that Paul understood this, and Paul gives us some very specific detail. Look at what he says. Lean in here. This is so important. Again, if you're a follower of Jesus or not, this will work for you. He says this. He goes, you want to know what love is? Love is large and incredibly patient. Love is gentle and consistently kind to all. And when I read this, I thought, this is exactly what Jill wants in our marriage relationship. This is exactly what my 5 sons want in a parenting relationship. Jill wants a husband who's gentle and tender and patient. My sons want a father who is patient and gentle with them, because that's love. Paul's spot on. It's like, yeah, man, that would be helpful. That's a great reminder. That's what love is. And then he continues and he says, that's not only what love is. Love, it refuses to be jealous when blessings come to someone else. Love does not brag about one's achievements or inflate one's own importance. Love isn't walking around just going like, hey, I'm so insecure. What are you doing? What are you looking at? If you've ever been on the other side of somebody who's insecure and somebody who's jealous, isn't it true that's an exhausting relationship? Isn't it true jealousy and insecurities just suck the life out of a relationship? And as much as a person may go, I know I struggle, I know. As much as they may say it and acknowledge it, the reality is in the relationship, it sucks the life, it sucks the wind out of the sails of that relationship. Because you're constantly going, am I looking at too much over here? What are they going to say about this text? What are they going to say that I didn't call them back? What are they going to say if I didn't text them back in the right time? Oh my gosh. Is there jealousy going to come out? And you're walking on eggshells. And we all know, if we were to describe that, just look at it objectively, we would go, that's not love. That's not going to add to the quality of relationship. Exactly. As Paul said. And then Paul gives us even more detail. And he says, when it comes to love, does not traffic in shame and disrespect, nor selfishly seek its own honor. Love is not easily irritated or quick to take offense. And man, this is so personal to me. Because guys, I've struggled with this one my whole life, and I've been fairly vulnerable with you guys, and I've shared this in my life. For me, when it comes to relationships, the patience piece, that's an area I struggle with. And in relationships, you want outcomes, especially like in parenting or really in any kind of relationship. You want this outcome over here. And there's really 2 ways to get the outcome. You can take the relational path, which takes more time, which takes more gentleness, which takes more patience, and it takes a lot of energy to get to the outcome, taking a relational path. But that's the most loving path you can take. Or you can take another path that I've taken. Trafficking, shame, and disrespect. You know what? I want this outcome. I don't want to take the relational time to get it. So, hey, what are you doing? You're an embarrassment. How dare you? I can't believe you've done that. And I'll say some of the hardest things, some of the most shameful things that cause my sons to question their identity, to question their worth, and whether or not they matter. Things that are disrespectful. Because I don't want to take the relational time to get the outcome. I just want it now. And I'm telling you, I've shared this with you guys. That's some of my greatest relational regrets in life. And I love the way Paul phrased this. Trafficking shame and disrespect. That is not love. And then he continues. In verse 6, he says, love joyfully celebrates honesty and finds no delight in what is wrong, I mean, love isn't constantly looking for you to screw up. That's not a thing that adds to the quality of the relationship. And all these things that Paul says are so helpful and so practical. I mean, any one of these verses we could camp on and just go, man, we could unpack this, and yeah, this is so helpful in our lives, and it would add to the quality of our relationships. But there's one verse, verse 7, that this verse is our first relational key that I want to share with you today. And this is a verse that I've thought about for years. This is a verse actually over the years I've taught here at North Point. So you may be somewhat familiar with what I'm about to say next. But guys, as we planned this whole series and we thought about, we whiteboarded the whole thing about, here's all these relational keys and what actually unlocks, the depth and the quality and the intimacy of our relationships. I mean, there was about 30 things on our whiteboard. This one thing in verse 7 kept coming to the top of the whiteboard. It is so foundational. It will help all of us experience a depth of relationship. So what does Paul say? Well, look at verse 7. Love is a safe place of shelter, for it never stops, look at these 3 words, believing the best for others. Paul gives us our first relational key, and he says the first relational key that unlocks the quality of relationships is to believe the best. That's to believe the best in every relationship, a parenting relationship, a marriage relationship, a relationship with mom and dad, a relationship with extended family, a relationship with your boss, a relationship with coworkers, a relationship with your teacher, a relationship with all your neighbors around you. It's to choose, and this is a choice, it's a discipline, to believe the best. And do you know why we have to believe the best? Because the reality that we live in, our reality in this world, is we live in all of us together collectively, we are all broken. That every single one of us, we would all agree there's not a single perfect person. And as a result of there's not a single perfect person, the result of that is there's not a single perfect relationship. In other words, I think if we're just talking, you would go, yeah, I don't know anybody who's perfect. I mean, we're all different in terms of the spectrum of, the things we've done in life, but there is no perfect person. Therefore, it stands to reason there's never going to be a perfect relationship. And so if you're looking for a perfect relationship, you just need to know you'll never find it. You're never going to find a perfect marriage, a perfect friendship, a perfect parenting relationship. You'll never find it because every single one of us, we're broken. And there's no perfect people. And as a result of no perfect relationship, there will be relational gaps. There's going to be a relational gap where somebody says, hey, I'll be home at 5 and it's 7 o'clock and they're not home. There's going to be a relational gap in a family where, hey, I'm coming for, Thanksgiving, or I'm coming for Christmas. And all of a sudden, phone rings, hey, I'm not coming. Oh, relational gap. There's going to be a relational gap where I said, clean your room, and I walk in and your room is not clean. There's going to be a relational gap where I told you to do it a certain way, and you didn't do it the way I told you to do it. And now all of a sudden we experience these relational gaps, and listen carefully. When you experience relational gaps in a marriage, in a parenting relationship, in a friendship, in a working relationship, in any kind of relationship, you put one of 2 things in that relational gap every single time. And you either put cynicism, and cynical people are not curious people. Cynical people are oftentimes not trusting people. Cynical people are fixers. Cynical people oftentimes have a tendency to be controllers. Cynical people are people who, hey, I've been there, done that, have the t-shirt, so I don't want to hear a thing from you. I'm not curious about anything you have to say. I'll just tell you what it is. I'll tell you what's going on. I'll tell you about this relationship. I'll tell you what you meant by what you said. I'll tell you what you did by what, being late, and here's what all that meant. I mean, that's cynical people. And you're either going to put cynicism, which if I had to summarize cynicism, I would summarize it as you're either going to assume the worst and be cynical, or you're going to put something else in the gap that Paul alludes to. You're going to put curiosity. Curious people are not cynical people. Curious people are often fairly trusting people. Curious people oftentimes have a smile. Curious people are often, fairly optimistic. Curious people are going, hey, I bet there's a good explanation. I bet there's maybe a better way than the way I told you. I mean, I told you to do it a certain way, but I'm watching the way you're doing it. All I really care about is the outcome. Maybe I'll learn something in this. And if I had to summarize curiosity, which is the other option you can put in the gap, I would summarize it as the words of Paul. It's to believe the best. To find the most generous explanation in whatever that relationship is and whatever relational gap. You see, cynicism, When there's a relational gap, maybe somebody, you check if you use Life 360, which I think a lot of parents use Life 360, tracking where your kids are, where that, If you use Life 360, which is like a tracking thing, and shows where your kids are at or where somebody's at, and you look at your phone and Life 360's off, cynicism will say, oh, what's going on? I mean, what are they doing? And here's the thing you have to consider about cynicism. Cynicism often attaches itself to a moral outcome. In other words, hey, they're late because they don't care about anybody else. Hey, they overspent again when they said they wouldn't because they're greedy. Cynicism is so interesting and so detrimental to a relationship because it oftentimes attaches itself to a moral outcome. And when Life 360 is off, it's off. I can't track them. Well, you know why? It's because they're secrets. You know why? It's because they're doing something terrible and sinful. Or curiosity says, oh, Life 360's off. I bet they just have a Droid device and not an Apple device because Droid devices are inferior. I bet, that's it. Maybe I just thought I'd slip that in real quick. Or, cynicism just says, I bet they slipped. I don't know. I bet there's a really good explanation. I don't know why. But hey, I'm going to choose to believe the best. Now lean in, pay attention. This is so important. Do you know what will determine what you put in the relational gap? Do you know what is the greatest determining factors that go, am I going to put cynicism or am I going to put curiosity in the gap? You know what does that? Two things. What you see, and if we're thinking about a piece of the pie, that's the smallest piece of the pie, what you see. I see you're late. I see you're calling and you're not coming for Thanksgiving. I see there's a overspending charge in our bank account and you said you wouldn't do that again. I see, right? Well, that's the smallest piece of the gap. The biggest piece of the pie is who you are. Is who you are. Do you know the most consistent thing you bring to every single relationship? It's you. Everywhere you go, there you are. And perhaps the things you experience in a marriage relationship, parenting relationship, friendship, extended family relationship, there's so much consistency. I mean, every relationship I have, I experience the same thing. Perhaps that's not a reflection of them. It's a reflection of you. And here's the thing about who you are and who I am, that you will bring who you are into every single relationship. And eventually, because there's no perfect people, which means there's no perfect relationships, there's going to be a relational gap. And when they say that thing, they do that thing irritates you, it's going to trigger you. I promise it will trigger you. And when it triggers you, guess what's going to happen? When you're triggered, what's in you will come out of you regardless who is with you and regardless of what kind of relationship it is. And that determines more than anything else what you put in the gap. And guys, I've seen this in my life. I mean, I think about, 10 years ago, I'm sitting at our kitchen table, hanging out with our boys, and there's vegetables on their plate. And I see my oldest son, Sam. At the time, he's probably 8 or 9 years old, and he's not eating his vegetables. And I'm like, oh, eat your vegetables. And I was irritated about it, and I was like, Sam, eat them. And he was like, no, Sam's kind of the one who likes to push the boundaries a little bit. Eat your vegetables. No, eat your vegetables. And we went back and forth. And then I started using, superlatives and some extreme language and started dipping into shame and started dipping into disrespect. And what are you thinking? I mean, this is an embarrassment. And anger came out of me. You know what I later discovered? Good Lord. I had nothing to do with Sam. In my relationship with my son, that piece of the pie, that was a tiny little sliver of what I saw. What hurt that relationship the very most is what was in me. Because that anger that was in me that had nothing to do with Sam, that anger was triggered. And what's in you will come out of you regardless who's on the other side of you. The number one thing that determines what you put in the gap is who you are. We're going to talk about that next week. But for today, as you kind of process all of this, or we process all of this together, I want you to be honest. I want to give you a moment to truly be honest with this conversation. And my question is, do you consistently put cynicism or curiosity in the relational gaps? Honesty. Like when there's a relational gap in your marriage, parenting relationship, with your mom or dad, with, coworker, with somebody at school, with a teacher, with a boss that, you just can't stand. What do you put in the gap when there's a relational gap? Do you have a tendency to put cynicism or curiosity? Believe the best, assume the worst. And here's what you need to understand. If you put cynicism in that gap, and you do that week after week, month after month, year after year, decade after decade, do you know what will eventually happen? What will eventually happen is you will turn into Walter, this fella right here. And Walter is a puppet. For the sake of an illustration, is that we all have this visual in our minds. In fact, we may have met some individuals like this. They're old, they're angry, they're grumpy, they're know-it-alls, they're cynical, and worst of all, they're lonely. And I don't want to go too far with this, but the reality is with the Walters in the world, is Walter's going to tell himself a lie over and over and over and over to justify his cynicism. And he'll be stuck. And guys, you don't want to be Walter. I don't want to be Walter. We don't want that outcome for us. So there's a different choice that we can all make in this. We can choose to do what Paul said, to believe the best, to fight for this, to make a decision, to believe the best, which is our first relational key. And if we do, people who experience authentic intimacy, that's what they do. That consistency, positivity, vulnerability, intimacy in relationship, quality relationships, they consistently choose to believe the best. And I'll give you one example of this. There's so many examples and so much research on this, but one example comes from Marcus Buckingham in his book, The One Thing You Need to Know. And this is a business book. If you've ever read it, it's about, just taking one principle as a business leader, one principle and applying it to your life. It can really transform your leadership. And so the whole book is about this thing. But to illustrate his kind of, premise of the whole book, he pulls from research, and he pulls from this research about marriage couples, or marriage relationships. And there's thousands and thousands and thousands of these marriage, relationships that were interviewed and that were studied, and all this research was done. And the whole point of this study that he was citing in his book was to find out, is there one thing, just one thing, that happy couples do and unhappy couples do? Is there one thing that can lead to happiness in marriage? And so this is an incredible study, and here's the observation of the study. This is so important, lean in. Here it is. It says, a spouse's positive illusion created an upward spiral of love. The illusion created a conviction. The conviction led to security. Security fostered intimacy, and the intimacy fostered love. There is something you can do. There is a choice you can make. We are all free to make it in every kind of relationship. And not only that, but then they had the conclusion of the study. They said the conclusion is a husband and wife who assumes that his or her spouse possesses a strength that he or she doesn't think he or she possesses will have a strong marriage. Hey, babe, I know you're late, but no big deal. I bet there's a great reason. I know we're overspent again, but I bet I bet you had to make a judgment call. Oh, man, I know you say what you see in the mirror you don't like, but I'll tell you what I see. Oh, you're beautiful. You're gorgeous. Hubba, hubba, hubba. It's that decision, daily decision. And some people will look at you and say, man, you're delusional. No. It's a choice that you've made. And here was the summary of the whole thing, their advice to you and to me. Find the most generous explanation for each other's behavior and believe it. Just do that one thing. In every relationship, this transcends relationships. And it's a step forward to begin to unlock the quality of that relationship. So in summary, just one last check-in for you, for all of us. When there's a relational gap, when things don't go the way you want them to go, when things feel like, oh, we're just stuck, what do you do? What do you put in that gap? In any kind of relationship, with your son, your daughter, your wife, your husband, your boss, your teacher, whoever it may be, your neighbor whose dog barks entirely too much. What do you put? Cynicism? Assume the worst? Assume the worst? Let me just say, if you do this, you need to know every time you make a deposit of cynicism, you are making a deposit to the demise of that relationship. Just be self-aware of the choice you're making. Or you can put another choice in the gap. Curiosity. Believe the best. Believe the best. I bet there's a great explanation. Now, please hear me well. Guys, today's conversation, we're not talking about perhaps something that you have discovered. And I'm not talking about being naive and putting your head in the sand. I mean, you got to believe the best. You got to fight for this because everything in you probably will fight against it. And you got to fight for it and fight for it regardless of what they've done in the past. I mean, if you said you forgive them, you said you forgive them. You need to hold to your word and forgive them. You've canceled the debt. They may have done it 70 times in the past, but today is the present. And in the present, you can make a choice for the quality of your relationships, and you got to fight to believe the best. But when you discover otherwise, yes, there will be a hard conversation to be had. And when you discover otherwise, yes, there will be boundaries perhaps you need to set up in that relationship. And when you discover otherwise, yes, there may be relationships you need to walk away from for the rest of your life. I'm not talking about that today. That's a whole different conversation, but I do think it's important to acknowledge. What I'm talking about today is the majority of all of our relationships. If we're talking about something, a key that we can all do to begin to unlock the quality of our relationships that unlocks the quality of our life, there is something all of us are free to choose to do, and it's to believe the best. And when you do that, it puts wind in the sails of that relationship, and ultimately, it accomplishes what Mama said. And what Mama said to you and to me, sweetie, the quality of your life is only as good as the quality of your relationships. So our first relational key together that we've discovered is make a choice today. Make a choice this week. Go for it. Do something different and choose to believe the best. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you so much for this moment, for this day, this time. God, I think when we talk about relationships, I don't think I know. There's so many layers to these conversations. And Father, you are more aware of that than we are. And so God, as we are together today, as we're listening and watching, Father, I just pray that you take these words and you make them make sense to our hearts and our minds. And ultimately, God, I pray that you give us all the courage. Please give us the courage to choose something different, to try it. And Father, when we take that step and we're courageous and brave and we try it, God, would you bless those efforts? And would you ultimately bless our relationships and help us begin to discover something deeper and richer and fuller in every one of our relationships? God, I trust you with that. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, guys, thanks so much for being here. I will see you next week for part 2.